And look at this. Here is Seth blessing the Pharaoh in opposition to Horus, his arch enemy. This means that order and disorder are part of the cosmic balance. And Seth has an important role in his stellar form, the constellation of the Big Dipper.
The Egyptians also called it the Thigh. One of the shafts in Giza's Great Pyramid is aimed at it, the opposite one pointing at Sirius, making this monument into a metaphor of resurrection, the quest for life after death, when souls went to the kingdom of Osiris and joined the stars in heaven. But where in heaven? This shaft inside the Great Pyramid seems to give an answer.
When the Egyptians looked at the night sky in the north, they saw a group of constellations going round and round the pole in 24 hours. These were the circumpolar stars. The Egyptians called them the imperishable, the stars that never die. And the reason is because these stars never set. And not surprisingly, they wanted to join these stars for eternity. Now we know that there was a very important ritual involving those stars to align the pyramids and temples.
The pharaoh and a priestess representing a goddess called Sashet would stretch a cord between them to define the direction of the temple, align it to the stars.
And this is what he was aiming at. He was aiming at the group of stars going round and round the pole, the imperishable, the stars that never died. And most particularly, he was looking at this constellation, the constellation we call the Big Dipper, and that they call the Thigh.
For there was another reason to focus on these stars.
The circumpolar stars literally go round and round in 24 hours. You can use them as a clock. Now, they also noticed that the relative position between the star that they watched in the Big Dipper and the star Sirius was very close to 90 degrees, almost like a set square. So as you shifted, all you have to do is know when a certain star is at a certain place to predict the rising of the star Sirius.
In defining the direction of the temple, aligning it to the stars, it all came together. Myth, magic, and the cosmic law. It was a way to know when the floods would come, a way to predict the yearly miracle that brought life back to Egypt. For Bauval, rediscovering this almost forgotten ritual was a breakthrough.
And look, here is Seshat, who aligns the temple to the stars of the Big Dipper. It's written everywhere.
The second breakthrough came when he began finding the code encrypted in stone. This is the pharaoh Djoser, who began the Great Pyramid Age. This statue is also found in a mysterious stone cubicle buttressed against this pyramid in a strange angle.
It was a lucky turn of the spade that this unique monument was found undamaged. It was long thought that Djoser was looking at the magical and sacred rituals in the courts. But he could not do that because of the inclination. He is looking up. He is looking at the northern sky. Why? He was looking at a particular place, 16 degrees above the horizon and 4 degrees to the right of the north-south axis of the sky. He is looking at the passage of this star, the hoof star of the Thigh. Why? The explanation is as simple as it is dramatic. For if at this precise moment you turn east, you will see that magical moment of the rising of the star Sirius. The architect has locked the whole complex into the machinery of the sky and of rebirth. That was a key, because I discovered later that this ritual was performed throughout the whole of Egyptian civilization, all the way to the end, and even in the Greco-Roman period.
Witness Dendera, the great temple built 1, in part even 2,000 years after the pyramids. Even in its final phases, ancient Egypt whispers the same sacred secret here.
This temple has its main axis aligned to the Big Dipper, to the north. And look, here is Seshat, the goddess who aligns the temple to the stars of the Big Dipper. It's written everywhere.
Spelled out for all to see, the other alignment of the temple to the rising of the star Sirius.
What seems to confirm this is that there are drawings showing a Horus king with a lance actually pointing to that place in this constellation.
Bauval's quest strikes a chord with others who study how the heavens above relate to monuments below in the minds of ancient kings and priests.
They seem to have a line too.
I like very much this idea of sacred machines. You have the cosmic order in the sky and you have the order on the earth. And you can open connections between them. We have very famous examples in other cultures as well. For instance, Stonehenge. It means that the cosmic level and the earth level communicate.
And this is what we have here at the pyramids. We have these shafts that direct the king to the northern region, to the circumpolar stars.
As in Egypt's ancient Book of the Dead, hidden meaning to the Giza Pyramid unfolds, with all the main players of a cosmic drama of death and rebirth.
It's as above, so below. You see, there's a terrible feeling also among many, many modern people that these were only old superstitions. These were only these primitive peoples. There were Einsteins in those days as well.
Bringing an ancient ritual back to life triggered a flood of new insights and understanding to Bauval. And there was even more to the goddess Seshat and the stars.
Seshat, but now she is recording the Jubilees, these great Hebset festivals. Seshat had another very, very important function: to record the years of reign of the king. This has tremendous implications. It would mean that she held the power to decide how long the king would reign, how long he would live, the years of life, because that's what reigns meant. Related to it is this, the first pyramid complex, the pyramid of Djoser at Saqqara. It is here that he had to prove his virility and his power. Marvelous festivities, colors, flags, procession, princesses, priests would come here, celebrate for 5 days. And the crescendo, like a Spanish corrida, was waiting for the king to come out himself physically, naked almost, wrapped around with a small loincloth, and having to run around the courts, a microcosm of Egypt. And if he could do that and still show his potency, perhaps even running after a wild bull, then the crowds would cheer and he would be given his reign. But if he did not, should the king be found old or incapable, then the country itself would suffer the same fate, and this could not be allowed. So, the implications are incredible.
Sacrifice of the king is known from other cultures: Celts, Spartans, Vikings, even amongst the African Dinka over a century ago. In earliest Egypt, a bull very soon took the place of the king, but the Hebset ritual remained crucially important and another reason to align monuments to what happened above.
It has always been a puzzlement why the great causeway that runs from the second pyramid along the side of the Sphinx is aligned 14 degrees from the center line of the Sphinx. Let's see on the computer. They tell us that they celebrated the Jubilee on the 22nd of October. Now let's see what happens on this day. We can see that the sun rises 14 degrees to the south of east, This is exactly the alignment of the causeway of the Sphinx. This alone should suggest that one of the functions of the Giza necropolis was to celebrate the royal jubilee. And we find this all over Egypt.
The great monument of Abu Simbel, 1500 years younger than the Great Pyramids and the Sphinx. Its axis in a similar angle as the causeway of the Sphinx, the Jubilee angle. This is the dawn of the 22nd of October, the day of Heb Set.
Sadly, because of the Lake Nasser, the light of the sun is a bit diffused. But were you here to witness the sharpness of the light, first the baboons would light up. These baboons in ancient times would come down on the edge of the Nile, and as the sun would rise, would greet the light of the sun and chatter and shout in joy as if speaking to the sun god. Then the sunlight comes down and shines on Rehorakti and on the sun disk that is on his head. And eventually the light strikes the face of the four colossi representing Ramses II. And at this moment, the light of the sun strikes the statues in the back. And at this precise time, it is shining over the pharaoh himself, Ramses II, and illuminating him with Rehorakti. He merges with the sun god in the light of the sun.
Who then, or rather what, was the pharaoh, builder of these monuments of the cosmos?
All such attention to the sky, this idea of sacred machines, was aimed as the foundation of power. The pharaoh, who was the ruler, he was founding his power on the stars. And this is, in fact, a quite common mechanism. The China emperor was the son of the sky, and so on.
You see it everywhere. The king, horse. The king, horse. The king, horse. The king is Horus. He is the sun god on earth. This isn't a representative wanting to build housing estates. This is a god on earth responsible for the cosmic law. Egypt believed that the whole of Egypt was a mirror of the heavenly landscape, and that all the changes that occurred in the sky, the cycles of the sun and the stars as they changed, were reflected on the ground. So, we have 3,000 years of pharaonic existence. So as the sky changes from north to south in the course of these 3,000 years, so do the monuments. And the principal site not only change location, but change orientation to match in perfect synchronicity. As above, so below, the cosmic law as it functions. If you understand this, you can decode Egypt.
Contours of a sky religion in which kings and priests obeyed the laws of the universe in the course of sun and stars as they built their monuments. They lead Bauval to daring new insights into the soul of ancient Egypt, hard to detect without knowing astronomy, and even harder because of Egypt's concept of the great wheels of time.
The Egyptians created a cycle regarding that star and the sun that is, I believe, the key to understand the whole system that they had in mind. They devised very early a solar calendar. They focus all their religious attention on the rising of the sun at the summer solstice, at the same time when that star appears. And they mention the phoenix coming to begin time.
That was Egypt's New Year's Day, and they saw the sun return to the same position 365 days afterwards. But through the years, they noticed that their New Year's Day drifted away from midsummer.
Why? Because the true solar year, of course, has 365 days and a quarter.
We add the extra day of February 29 to adjust for this leap year. But the ancient Egyptians didn't do this. To them, it was the sacred order of the gods, and it should not be changed.
And so, every 4 years, the New Year's Day moved by 1 day. And every 8 years by 2 days, and so on, and so on, and so on.
It slowly created a different cycle of time.
It means that the seasons gradually get out of step with the artificial year, and therefore a long time must elapse, many hundreds of years, before the status quo is repeated. And this is the Sothist cycle. And it obviously was a great festival.
The Sothic cycle, Greek historians called it, after Sothis, their name for Isis, from whose womb Rehorakti sprang on that special day when Egypt itself was reborn. And although the magical moment of rebirth occurred every year the same time at summer solstice, Egypt's New Year's Day on its calendar, the birth of Ra, moved further and further away from it.
It would take a full cycle 4 times 365 years. That is 1,460 years to return back to its original point. This was the return of the phoenix.
The cycle begins on June 21st, when the sun rises far to the north. Losing 1 day every 4 years, each next generation of Egyptians saw its New Year's Day later in the year, and the sun rise away from the north. As over centuries, New Year crept towards winter, the sun would rise farther and farther to the south until winter solstice after 730 years, and then back to the north as the New Year crept back again to midsummer to complete the circle after 1460 years.
It is the reunion of the sun with the star Sirius and the flooding of the Nile. So, what happened at this point? We know from the Greeks that visited Egypt in the late period that the beginning or end of such a cycle, which the Greeks called the Sothic cycle, was in the year 139. We have a point of reference, 139 AD.
Roman authors describe Egypt exploding in celebration. Another cycle began 1460 years earlier, in 1320 BC. 730 years earlier, the New Year's Day fell at the winter solstice in 2050 BC. A further 730 years back to the summer solstice gives 2780 BC. What happened at these points?
Well, in 2780 BC, we see a flurry of activity, an explosion of construction. Pyramids are built in the north. Temples, the Temple of Heliopolis rises. The city of Memphis rises. The solar temples of Abu Ghraib.
In centuries before, Egypt's center had moved from the south at Hierakonpolis here to the north, and the sudden dawn of the Great Pyramid Age.
This is where it all began, 2800 BC. This is when a flurry of activity in building took place, an explosion that took place over the landscape. And this is the very first pyramid complex in the history of Egypt. The whole complex was surrounded by a massive perimeter wall made up of protrusions and indentations and panels. If you count the panels on each side of the wall, you will arrive at the figure of 1,460. The Phoenix Sothic cycle. Can this be a coincidence?